We've been speaking about Roe v. Wade ever since it was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1973. Americans United for Life has been speaking on behalf of the human right to life since even before that. It seems though this year in particular, major changes might be afoot in American law concerning abortion. On September 1st, 2021, a Texas heartbeat law was allowed to take effect, making abortions performed after 6 weeks of gestational age hypothetically illegal. We're going to talk about that today with Steve Aden, Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel at Americans United for Life, as well as two returning friends. I'm Tom Shakely, and this is Life, Liberty, and Law. All right, welcome to Life, Liberty, and Law from Americans United for Life, where we advance the human right to life in culture, law, and policy. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by an all-star cast, some old-timers and some returning favorites. Steve Aden, Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel, of course, returning to the show to speak to us about what's happening in Texas with the heartbeat law. But we've also got Anna Claire Noblet, of course, returning to the show, and a Texas native, Eric Abels. Steve, Anna Claire, Eric, how y'all doing?
Great, Tom. Thanks.
Doing great.
I'm great, thank you.
Excited about this topic. Yeah.
I know, yeah. So as we said in the intro, Roe, of course, has been top of mind for really anybody following the human right to life issues, and Texas seems to have gone big. Steve, I know you wrote about this recently in terms of what Texas has done. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to hit up a lot of different topics. I think, for me, what kind of captured the drama of this more than anything else was some of the mainstream news coverage. And it's easy to beat up on mainstream news for getting things wrong all the time. But I think the way that this was portrayed, particularly in The Week, this was also on Yahoo, really kind of sets the tone for what, the average person is thinking when they see this news come out. The Week headlined their piece that the Supreme Court just effectively overturned Roe v. Wade with legal Calvin ball. Steve, did the Supreme Court just effectively overturn Roe v. Wade?
No, that's absurd, Tom. And all of the hand-wringing and hysteria is not appropriate. Once again, the media has gotten out ahead of the rest of us. I mean, Clark Forsyth and I have been on the phone the last 2 days with Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, NPR, you name it, trying to get them to understand that this is not a silent overturn of Roe at all. In fact, the Supreme Court's action the other day, rather than 5-4, should have been 9-0, because they should never have entertained the abortion industry's appeal in the first place for procedural reasons that we'll get into. No, it's once again them utilizing the media to try to get a hand up on the Supreme Court, to beat the Supreme Court down, because they anticipate that when the Dobbs case from Mississippi is heard, that the Supreme Court itself may be ready to, as you said, go big on abortion and potentially overturn Roe, or at least tamp it down quite significantly. So I think they're using this opportunity to beat up on the court and threaten the court from the media, but I hope that the court is not hearing it.
That's right, yeah. So Catherine Glenn Foster wrote on Americans United for Life's website, AUL.org. She wrote on September 1st, when this really took place, she said, quote, "The 6-week heartbeat protection law took effect because the U.S. Supreme Court declined to act on petitions submitted by abortion businesses opposed to the law." So essentially, abortion activists sought to restrain Texas from being able to put this law into effect. But what's innovative about the law, as Catherine goes on to say, is she says, states are laboratories of democracy, and Texas enacted a law it felt could go into effect despite Roe v. Wade and despite the U.S. Supreme Court's erroneous abortion precedents. Catherine says this is because the state of Texas isn't responsible for enforcement. Rather, the law empowers Texans themselves to bring lawsuits against anyone who performs or assists in performing an abortion after that 6-week heartbeat point of gestational age. And this would potentially result in a civil suit and a fine of up to $10,000 paid by the defendant. So this strikes me as really innovative, right, Steve? I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, and it's a thing that I think has been elided in a lot of this coverage. People, I think, are reading this and assuming this means Texas, is going to be bringing cases against abortionists or others involved in abortion after 6 weeks. But that's not the case, right? The state isn't actually involved in this at all.
It is new, Tom. It is innovative. We'll have to wait and see what the courts ultimately do with it. But that's why the Supreme Court did not act upon it. It involves no state action whatsoever. Nothing that the state of Texas is doing with respect to so-called abortion rights. That's why the Supreme Court's action in not granting an emergency order was appropriate. And it should have been 9-0 instead of 5-4. But 4 members of the court took the opportunity to distort the law of federal procedure, the law that regulates whether federal courts should take cases, and to say that the court should have taken this case. That's what abortion does since Roe versus Wade. It distorts every aspect of law that it touches. It's distorted the First Amendment law of free speech. It's distorted the law of who can bring a lawsuit, standing, allowing abortion providers to sue on behalf of their patients. And here it threatens to distort the very law that regulates what federal courts can hear and what they can't hear. So that's just what Roe does.
Yeah, and as Catherine notes too, importantly, no one seeking an abortion themselves can be sued, and no woman can be prosecuted under this Texas law. I think important to underscore as well, in this era when we're seeing news headlines purporting to say that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, or even in some of those dissents from the Supreme Court justices themselves, suggesting this is an affront to Roe in a unique way, when exactly as you just said, Steve, this is basically just a matter of this is an issue that isn't within the Supreme Court's authority even to enjoin at this point or to interfere with. We'll see how things play out now that the law is in effect. Anna Claire, Eric, I mean, what do you make of this on the ground?
I've seen, just to go to an earlier point that you discussed, I think is really important. I've seen a lot of media portray this in a lot of different ways. The same article you were talking about, reading through it sounds more like an angry Facebook post than it does, an unbiased media opinion that you're sending out for the country to read. And that makes no sense to me. I think if people want to get to the root of things, they should start off with the opinions themselves. The unsigned majority opinion, and then Roberts has a dissent, Breyer has a dissent. You can go through and read some of those. And just kind of seeing what the more media portrays, maybe it shows a lot of people haven't. Or maybe it shows a lot of people just don't understand some of the procedural issues. It sounds like the court doesn't understand the procedural issue. That's why they didn't enjoin it. I think they mentioned multiple times, even Roberts mentions in his dissent, this is a novel issue. This is things that we don't understand yet, that we have no, he mentions, there's no record. There hasn't been a district court hearing or anything yet. There hasn't been a court of appeals hearing. So how can they go through and act on nothing? That's not what the Supreme Court's meant to do. And, I took a couple notes from that same article, like I said, that you mentioned. Just a couple quotes that they throw out here. First off, they start by saying that, half the justices' seats are stolen. A weird diversion off the issue that we were meant to discuss in the article. And then they
Yeah, what's the point of that?
Exactly. They say a bunch of things, as the court's making it up as it goes along. And I mean, that sounds like a lot of the Warren Court and maybe part of the Burger Court in the earlier 70s to me. They say this is a stark violation of traditional concepts of precedent and the rule of law, which is to say, like I said, we've discussed at AUL multiple times. There's multiple facets you can read about Roe being unsettled precedent, and that's why there's case after case after case still discussing it. That's why there's so much contention in the air still about it. And then finally, they end with something I actually agreed with. They say, put the Supreme Court back in its place and let the legislator decide. And I'm thinking, isn't that exactly what Texas did here? They found a legal procedural loophole almost in the system. And whether it holds up with constitutionality, Roberts talks about, okay, well, we'll get to that question when it's correctly presented. Here it's not correctly presented, but he still takes the opportunity to dissent from the opinion to enjoin. It made no sense to me. I don't see how you can say we're going to let the legislator do what they want to do, or or we'll let them, like I said, roam their ground when it comes to deciding issues like this. But then at the same time, we need to enjoin every single time they're going to. It just didn't make sense.
Yeah. What do we make of it? I mean, I think for someone who I've had a lot of friends asking me this week, and I'm on an undergrad campus, and it's just interesting the way that people attach to one word or one phrase. And even something I've seen on social media, this is disgusting. I'm never moving back to Texas, and it's just funny because there is a lot of work to be done to understand what this really means and the way that the courts work for someone who's not a law student like you, Eric, or, a legal counsel or a lawyer. So trying to bridge that gap is difficult, but kind of the one thing I keep coming back to is this is just the history of abortion law is so tangled and winding, and that is why creative loopholes have to happen in order for Texas lawmakers to feel like they can actually accomplish what they want to see in their state. And the goal is that it doesn't have to be this complicated. And so that's kind of the only way I know how to say it. I'm like, no, it's not really ideal, but this is kind of the only option, and it reflects how strongly people feel about the importance of the right to life.
Yeah, ironically, Anna Claire, it should not be this hard, but it became this hard because it all started in Texas with Roe versus Wade and the Supreme Court nullifying the entire abortion control chapter of the Texas statutes. And Texas since then has been doing many things to try to reassert its commitment to protecting life. Just recently also, the Texas legislature passed a bill regulating the dangerous practice of chemical abortion, a bill that Americans United for Life helped draft and supported. And the full Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Texas could outlaw the horrific practice of dismemberment abortion. So great things are happening in Texas. And I guess to coin a phrase, Eric, let's talk about Texas. What's it like to be in one of the most pro-life states in the country from the ground there?
Sure. So, I mean, first off, I can say personally, I love it. Steve, I think your post had a line that really stuck with me. It was the state that saw its abortion regulations struck down as the one leading the way. That to me was really powerful. Depending on the part you're in Texas, like the city, Austin tends to be very furthering progressive, and so I just like Anna Claire said, I've heard a bunch of things, I mean, for lack of a better term, a bunch of misinformed things. I've seen people posting, whether it's on social media or protesting about, the bill has certain protections, and there's things that we've discussed already. I've seen people saying things like, it's now legal to sexually assault a woman, impregnate her, and then you can sue her when she has the abortion. And that's just blatantly not true. They're going viral. These tweets and these things go viral over social media, and so I think majority of Texas individuals don't think like that.
You're from Austin, right?
I am from Austin, so it's concentrated. But I mean, like I said, the majority of Texas individuals don't think like that. I think that people like to try to paint Texas blue, which tends to coincide with pro-choice, and it's not. And for the legislator to enact something like this, I think, goes away to say that this is how most individuals think, and this is what most individuals would like to see. And kind of like to mirror what Steve was saying, it's upsetting to see that we have to go through 15 different turns in the maze to find a way. I think it was a post someone shared, a friend of mine, not from Texas actually, and she mentioned there's 18 abortion facilities in Texas, and there's over 180 something pregnancy care centers. And she was like, if those 18 centers close, those pregnancy care centers offer free service. And they had, she had the figures and the numbers, the millions of dollars they put into care, the thousands of people they help. And so I think just to hear the narrative that these people, when I say these people, I don't think it's a majority, but to hear the narrative that a lot of people are saying, I think is harmful. I think you don't do anything except for spread false information, which I think is one of the worst things you can do. But I'm really proud, like I said, of Texas to not only be leading the way, but like Steve said, to be enacting, whether it's chemical abortion, whether it's dismemberment, things that the Fifth Circuit originally shot down, the dismemberment, and like I said, they came back and bonk and upheld it. So it's great to see the people of Texas actually, enacting things that they would like to see enacted, as opposed to some outside, whether it's a media source or something else, putting it away.
Yeah, when we hear so much talk about the importance of democracy and the importance of Americans being heard, right? You trace that all the way back to Roe, which was 7 men on the U.S. Supreme Court issuing a decision that wiped out, nullified the democratic will of everybody in, every state, maybe except New York. And they had no problem doing it, right? So it's one of these things where we hear about democracy only when it serves one particular vision for what the good is. And unfortunately, a strong minority in some states have seized on this idea that the violence and self-harm and harm of abortion is a good. And that needs to be rooted out. It's a shame, I think, in this case with Texas, with this 5-4 decision, even the Chief Justice joining the dissenters, because it plays into this needless narrative that these are fraud issues. As Steve said, and Ed Whalen at EPPC and National Review has also been great on this and breaking it down. This should have been a 9-0 decision. It's pretty cut and dry. I think just from a standpoint, I'm not an attorney, but having grown close to attorneys over the past few years, especially at American Center for Life, it's discouraging to me to see people at the highest levels of jurisprudential practice set aside the law when they decide that optics or politics are more important. I don't know any other way as an average layman to read something like that, to read the Chief Justice dissenting for the reasons he did as anything other than a sort of politicking, which he and others claim that they don't want to do. They don't want to make the court political. They want it to be an institutional and legitimate force. Fair enough. But, people following these issues are observing what's happening. And what's happening doesn't seem to be the impartial rule of law. I think, and when it relates to that, Steve, I want to talk about what you wrote recently on this and what might come next in terms of what's happening in Texas. But it strikes me before we get to that, Steve, if you're on the court and you were one of the 5 justices in this narrow decision, in a sense, saying we don't have the authority to rule on this yet, if you're already being pilloried for supposedly reversing Roe at midnight, is this going to make you more or less likely to have some of that intestinal fortitude when it comes to ruling on Dobbs, right? If I'm on the Supreme Court and I'm saying we're already getting pilloried for something that actually didn't even touch Roe or abortion fundamentally, and you're on the fence about how you might decide in Dobbs, maybe fearful, right, of those repeat scenes of people hammering on the door of the Supreme Court, maybe that's going to help you make the right decision.
I hope so. Ask Brett Kavanaugh, who obviously went through a horrific nomination hearing and then was put on the court in spite of that. And then members of the left had the temerity to come back around and plead with Brett Kavanaugh to be the reasonable justice on abortion. I think it solidifies their position. It hardens their resolve. And I think we'll find out next year when the Dobbs case comes out. We have promoted Charles Cook in National Review, wrote an excellent piece arguing that Roe is the problem.
I love this.
Roe is the problem because Texas should have been able to protect women and limit abortion and protect life in the womb, but it had to go through this Rube Goldberg machine of legislation to license private individuals to enforce abortion law because Roe's the problem. Roe stood in the way. Roe kept Texas from expressing the will of the people. And Cook is right. David French, our friend at the Dispatch, has it right also. He said that this case is important, but it is a distraction in the sense that the real show is Dobbs. The real show is what the Supreme Court will do with abortion next summer in the Dobbs case. So keep your eye on that. We can talk about what might happen in Texas with SB 8, but the real issue is what happens with Roe and abortion next summer. So we're looking forward to that. We're working hard. We wrote a brief for 238 members of Congress urging the overturn of Roe, and we're hoping and waiting to see what the court does on this most important issue.
Yeah, Steve. So let's speak about this. I think David French is right in this case, and Charlie Cook is right in this case. Charlie Cook called Roe a gremlin. He says that that Rube Goldberg machine you referenced. He says this is the latest action by Texas is not in a vacuum. He says this is Texas is responding to what the Supreme Court has done, which is a response to what previous Supreme Courts did, which was a response to what even earlier Supreme Courts did, and all of it, he says, right from the start, has been nonsense. And that's because he says Roe is a lie, it's a contrivance, it's a calculation. He says it's a 50-year-old imposter that has distorted our fundamental law, corrupted our politics, and damaged our Constitution. It is a gremlin, he says. And I think in that respect, as we face Dobbs, right, as you're pointing out, we have to be clear-eyed about what we're willing to perpetuate. And whether you're on the Supreme Court or whether you're the rest of us, do we want another generation, another 20 years, another 50 years of saying the same thing over and over again and just basically waiting for Supreme Court compositions to change?
No.
I think the time is now. Exactly, Anna Claire.
No, yeah, the emperor has been stripped of his clothes and shown to be without any authority, naked, in law and politics today. So when you look at the opening brief of Mississippi in the Dobbs case, they're saying the exact same thing to the Supreme Court that Charles Cook and David French are saying to the American public. There never was any content, substance, anything in the Constitution that gave the so-called right of abortion in Roe. And now you have states willing to say that before the Supreme Court. It's a new day. The pretense has been stripped. And many of us are looking forward to seeing what the court does now that the argument has been met in the court, the argument that there never was and never will be a so-called right to abortion in the U.S. Constitution.
That's right. Steve, you and I have talked in the past about, you've pointed out, right, that when it comes to heartbeat bills, one of the challenges of them up to this point was that, a heartbeat bill has never saved a single life, right? And the reason for that is because for all the passion about them, about the principle of this, about protecting at the earliest stage, at the very first moment of heartbeat, a scientifically objective point in gestational development, despite all that, the courts would always step in, right, because of Roe and because of this contrivance in our fundamental law, and they would say these heartbeat bills can't go into effect. And so there was a lot of energy that pushed them, but then when it came to implementation, it never quite got over the finish line. It seems that with Texas right now, even if it's just for a few days or a few weeks, that the Texas heartbeat bill may, in fact, now be saving lives. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I may have to restate that, because if SB 8 goes into effect, which it has at this point, it may result in some women reconsidering the value of the life they carry within them. Ultimately, I think that SB 8 is going to be problematic, and here's why. It relies on private citizens to go into civil court, Texas state court, and file essentially private attorney general actions against abortion providers. At that point, it's my belief that the courts will dismiss those actions, saying that what the providers are doing is constitutional, according to the Supreme Court, and that it's unlawful to sue an individual for doing something the Supreme Court has called a constitutional right. Now, you might say, Steve, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth now. You said the Supreme Court did the right thing the other day, but on the other hand, this won't fly in Texas courts. Well, it is a matter of procedure. The Supreme Court did the right thing because the federal courts are not the places to resolve this issue. On the other hand, state trial courts are. And we have a rule in the U.S. that you can't be sued for doing something that the Supreme Court has called constitutional. Certainly nobody would countenance a law that ostensibly creates a private attorney general action to sue somebody for violating the Second Amendment, right? And carrying handguns. That would be absurd. So I don't think it will go far ultimately, but the state courts are the place for this to be decided, and we expect that to happen. But David French is right. Ultimately, this is a flash in the pan. It's a different way of expressing, on behalf of the people of Texas, a commitment to protecting the right to life and to protecting women. And it will be added to the chorus of voices among the states before the Supreme Court, urging that the states have the lawful authority under the Constitution to express their commitment to protecting life in the womb.
Yeah, I want to circle back around to what Eric said too earlier about there being so many more pregnancy care centers in Texas to where our voice as the pro-life movement is being completely distorted. And that's really the ultimate tragedy of these cases and these laws that, every heartbeat bill that gets attempted creates this eruption. And I do hope that eruption and just the attention that it brings does make people think and consider, oh, this is important for me to know what I believe about this and why, and is this right, and what should be happening. But I think that the tragedy is just that our voice gets and our position gets misunderstood so terribly whenever we really.
Well, and it's
Right,
because we don't hold the
exactly.
power in the media, right? I mean, as you say, Anna Claire, like, and Eric, these pro-life pregnancy centers, if you were to put them equally across the United States, there would be more than one for every county in the United States. So pro-life pregnancy resource centers, they outnumber abortion businesses more than 3 to 1. I
It's
think
about
there
5 to
are
1.
fewer than 800, maybe fewer than 5 to 1. See, yeah, I mean, it's gotten even better. I think there are fewer than 700 abortion businesses in the U.S. now in terms of the traditional surgical centers.
Definitely on
Chemical
the rise.
abortion
Yeah.
has been really, what Planned Parenthood
Right.
views
But
as their growth industry, right? They want to make that as if, you're getting something off
mhm.
Amazon Prime. And Katie Glenn has talked about the dangers of this when there's no physician involved as to what you're actually doing
Yeah. Well,
to yourself.
I, I really, man, it's just so important. And that's why we're doing this today that we really say, that it's all about women and mothers and their children. And it is just heartbreaking to become the villain and this narrative because the pro-life movement is caring for people and we're up against a monster of an industry. But yeah, just to I don't know. I just hope that as we are furthering legislation at every single level of government that we can, that our listeners and just everyone who would consider themselves pro-life knows the importance of your day-to-day interactions that ultimately change hearts and ultimately can give the pro-life movement a new face, and that is your face, not what the media is characterizing it to be. So just some encouragement because it's really there's all of those people, all of those volunteers who are caring for women in crises. That's who we are.
That's right. That's 100% right. And I think, as we engage in these conversations going forward, especially concerning the Dobbs case, which is going to pick up steam, the Supreme Court, as of now, has not yet shared when they're going to hear oral arguments in that case, which is the next big step in it before, they actually really consider it and render a decision and announce that decision at some point in 2022. But as this is unfolding, I would just encourage, each of us, first hear this conversation, but everyone really to step out of the social media vortex and realize that, the people posting those things, right? Erica, you're mentioning people posting all sorts of wacky things. We see them. I know, I've stepped away from Facebook by and large over the past few months. It's been one of the best things I've done probably in the past 10 years. I'll log in occasionally and I'll see here's, 30 notifications. Almost all of these are completely irrelevant. I'm sorry, I missed a message from somebody, but that's it. It's a healthier way to live, and it helps us realize where do we actually have to engage? go out in public, volunteer at a pregnancy center, speak to a friend, have fellowship with a family member,
Well,
right, that
and
you haven't
two,
seen,
a lot of the
especially in COVID
people I
time.
think that we're seeing so offended by a threat to, getting abortion on demand at any point in pregnancy. I mean, people are so offended when it's personal for them, and there's so much hurt often involved, whether it's their own life or a friend or a family member. And people have really dark stories regarding abortion, including our president, Catherine Glenn Foster. I mean, she's a primary example of someone who was wronged by the industry, who, she would have really benefited from a waiting period or counseling session or some of these laws that states are trying to enact. And a lot of people
That's
have these
right.
stories that they're they don't want to share, and it's so personal and so dark for them that any threat to shedding light on that situation that often involves a lot of hurt just immediately turns defensive, and we don't know their stories. So just as much as we have our pro-life background, people,
That's right. And
we don't know where people have been, and there's often a lot of hurt involved when it comes to this issue.
that's right. And that's also the related point to stepping away from the digital, right? Because to some degree, these things, they bring us into these, abstract debates, right? The people saying, I'm never going to travel to Texas again. I mean, it's absurd in the sense that it's so removed from any reality. And I think of a friend who recently, spoke to somebody where there was a political debate happening over the internet, over Facebook and Twitter profiles. And, the person was basically making the point that they didn't feel that any pro-lifers would support them, if they were in a difficult situation. And it turns out they had been in a difficult situation. And that was revealed in the course of personal one-to-one communication. And, the person felt really that there was no point in asking for help. There was no point in letting anybody close to them know, because who would have helped? And, this other person said, you can ask me. You can ask me today if something happens. I will help you. I will come. I'll come watch your kids that you've got. I'll help you. We can cook meals together, whatever. But that's part of what the abstraction does, right? It's not just that it's bad for us because it's abstract. It also removes us from one another, from that idea that, hey, we're all reading these things on our iPhones. Our iPhones are also phones. Call the other person. Go meet up with them, right? It's that intimate personal encounter that is where
Crazy idea,
solidarity can
Tom.
actually be
Crazy.
practiced. Well, I think this is all good stuff. I think the Texas developments are incredible. There's incredible passion there. It's the first heartbeat law that has gone into effect in this way. It's made headlines, obviously, for that fact, that achievement. I think you're right, Steve, that this Texas case is likely to be a temporary victory. We know that abortion activists aren't going to let it lie if they can find a way to contest it. But more to the point, Dobbs remains front and center, and that's why I think we'll link to all these in the show notes. But Steve, your great piece at AUL, Texas heartbeat law goes big on protecting life, but Roe remains the obstacle, right?
Yeah.
That story is the same as it's ever been for us, right? Roe remains the obstacle, and so we're going to continue to follow this case. And we thank you for your
We know
leadership
you're working so
along
hard,
the way,
Steve.
Steve.
There's so much that goes into this case that's coming up, and we just are so thankful. Yeah, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself on the shot of gratitude, but I just know that you and the team really, really are such a huge part of this, and yeah, keep it up.
No, you're right, Anna Claire, and it is great to have you on the team again. That's one of my shots of gratitude. The other is, I have to say, having worked on this issue, the most important issue, as I said, the human rights issue of our generation for decades, and to see now the moment when the Supreme Court may finally throw Roe on the ash heap of history, is extremely gratifying. I'm grateful to God. I'm grateful to all of my co-laborers who've worked so hard. So that's my shot of gratitude.
I appreciate you sharing that, Steve. And yeah, every week we do our shot of gratitude. This is, of course, our first post Noah Brandt. So it's I'm a little bit misty eyed about that, but we're carrying forward the torch. Anna Claire, what's your shot of gratitude?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think just knowing that as someone with really strong pro-life convictions on every stage of life, that I can, be faithful where I am, but also have an amazing team of lawyers at AUL. And then, we've talked to some pro-life journalists in the past few weeks, and just that this is such a really big team, in the, words of a song. We have a really big team. We have people working on all fronts, and it's just as heavy and as strong as the convictions are, to see women and children free from the reins of the abortion industry, especially after we have the science to see a baby's heartbeat and know their individuality. I mean, even more obviously, I think, it's just great to be able to kind of put your head down where you are and know that there's so much going on around the country and in DC. And yeah, just thankful to know that today, and to have people like Eric training up to do the same thing. And yeah, what about you,
That's
Eric? We'll
right.
pass it on to you.
Sure. You know, I have two, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Look,
Go for
it's
it.
Labor Day weekend, Eric. You can have as many as you want. This is a time of cornucopia of
I was going
gratitude.
to say, this is
That's
my
right.
first time on the show, so I think I can throw an extra one out there. Before I do, the one line that Tom, you mentioned democracy. I think it's really interesting that pro-choice tends to think democracy is all about choice, but the unborn don't have a choice. And that's just, something I always think about, like I said, whenever I read those kinds of articles. As for the shots of
Right. That's that idea that the comparatively powerful are the ones who really have a vote, right? And it's like if the powerful are the only ones getting to have a vote, then it ain't really a democracy.
Exactly. Shots of gratitude. One of them is just a real quick personal one. I'm really thankful for one of my professors at law school here. Her name is Sarah Cole. She's the director of the dispute resolution program, which is something I'm in. She runs our mediation clinic. I'm involved in that right now. And just speaking with her every day, she's kind of one of my mentors I got here on campus. We went down to the courthouse and mediated some cases yesterday, some small claims cases. But just really seeing, eviction court was going on. Like I said, there's a bunch of small claims cases and things and whatnot. And just seeing, how actual practice really influences or impacts people, especially a lot of the people, like I said, who tend to be at eviction court or small claims court. Money isn't always a common thing with them, and it's just about how you're going to survive the next day. So I'm really grateful for her, like I said, for giving me these kind of opportunities and helping teach me. And she's a person I talk to a lot, whether it's about the pro-life movement or whether it's about other issues on campus, and I really appreciate her. The other one I'd say, I'm really grateful just for Anna Claire and Tom for you guys inviting me on. I really appreciate, like I said, being here and helping share my opinion, whether it's a Texas native or a subpar law student. But
AUL legal fellow. Don't forget
that's
that
true.
one.
I appreciate it.
That's
Thank
right.
you. But like I said, it's great it's really refreshing also to hear, other people, I don't want to say who agree with you, but other people who you can speak to about these issues. It's so hard to even get into a classroom and say anything along those lines, or even ask someone if they read this article or send them the link or anything, because you get, in a sense, blacklisted almost sometimes, and
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I really appreciate just having an avenue to be able to talk with you guys, and obviously all the work that everyone does and AUL does, and the other organizations that we work with. But I really appreciate everyone specifically on this call. Just like I said, for letting me join in. I think it's been a great time.
Thanks
Well,
for
it's
doing
awesome.
it.
Awesome to speak on these issues. And Eric, you're an Ohio Stater. I'm a Penn Stater. It's not often the case that there's a lot of comity between these two rivalries, especially in autumn. But I am grateful for all you're doing, and I just wanted to call that out there, Eric. Thanks.
Hey, that's
But
fine. Roll Tide. And I'm an Alabama guy, so I mean,
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But Alabama, another Ohio State, Alabama, and Penn State. That's like a real triangle of rivalry
Yeah.
right there.
that's a good trifecta. But
But
The most wonderful time of the year. We probably won't have an episode without mentioning college football for a few months.
exactly, yes, we'll have Katie Glenn on next week to talk about the Gators. But I'm just grateful. It is Labor Day. It's Labor Day weekend. I'm grateful for this changing of the season. It's still summer. We still got 3 weeks left, so I don't want to fast forward the clock too much. But you're right, Anna Claire. College football season is starting, and these times of the year, I think it's so important that we get back to normalcy. So I'm grateful for that. I think we've lived through a really strange year and a half, almost 2 years of let's just call it norm busting. We've heard a lot about the importance of norms. These are some of the norms I want to return to. So I'm grateful for the season we're entering into, but also the chance to break up a norm, which has been Roe and its disastrous effect on American life. So we're going to continue to write about that. Steve, thankful for your advocacy on it, and definitely check out our links in the show notes to AUL.org and the other great articles. Anna Claire, Steve, Eric, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's always a privilege. Thank you, Tom.
I appreciate all y'all. Thank you.
Have a great Labor Day weekend.
All right, if you enjoyed our conversation today with Steve Aden, Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel of Americans United for Life, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, wherever you listen to the show, rate it and leave a review. If you have any comments or questions for Steve Aden or for any of us, just email us at life@aul.org. If you want to advance pro-life legislation in your state, email us at life@aul.org and check out all of our great resources on our website about how to advance the human right to life in culture, law, and policy. I am Tom Shakely, and until next time, thanks for listening to Life, Liberty, and Law.